The old house in Spooky Harbour had always fascinated me. From the moment I stepped inside its weathered, creaking doors, I was entranced by its history, its stories, and the way it seemed to carry the echoes of the past within its walls. But as the months passed, a chilling presence began to seep through the cracks and infuse the air, sending shivers down my spine. At first, it was just small things. A door left slightly ajar, a barely audible whisper in the still of the night, and the unshakable feeling of being watched. I told myself that it was just the quirks of an old house, but with each passing day, the eerie presence grew more tangible. One night, as I lay in bed, a frigid breath brushed against my cheek, and I felt a weight at the edge of my bed as though someone was standing there, silently observing me. My heart raced as I fumbled for the bedside lamp, and when its light cut through the darkness, the room was empty. There was no one there, yet the oppressive feeling lingered, and I couldn't escape the sensation of being watched. I dismissed it as a vivid dream, but sleep was elusive. The room was hauntingly silent, except for the faint echoes of a woman's laughter, as though it resided within the very walls themselves. The inexplicable occurrences escalated. Objects moved on their own accord. A chair scraped across the floor, a vase tumbled from a shelf, and phantom footsteps echoed in empty rooms. My nights were filled with vivid, disorienting nightmares, and I would wake to find bruises on my body, as though I had been held down by unseen hands. Desperate for answers, I threw myself into researching the history of the house, unearthing tales of previous residents who had experienced the same inexplicable phenomena. Margaret, the last inhabitant of the house, had left behind a legacy of peculiarity, from her late-night pacing to the cryptic notes she had scrawled in her final years. One of those notes hinted at a malevolent entity that had tormented her, a shadowy figure that whispered sinister promises during the darkest hours. With each revelation, I could feel the chilling grasp of the past tightening around me. One evening, I sat in the dimly lit living room, the atmosphere heavy with anticipation. I could sense a presence drawing near, and the room seemed to grow darker, the shadows deepening. I caught a fleeting glimpse of movement, a flicker of a figure passing through the room, but when I turned to look, there was nothing there. Terrified, and with nowhere else to turn, I decided to seek the help of Mrs. Blackwell, a local psychic renowned for her ability to communicate with the spirits of the departed. She agreed to visit the house, and as soon as she crossed the threshold, her demeanour shifted. "There's something here," she whispered, her eyes wide with recognition. "Something malevolent, something that lingers in the shadows." Mrs. Blackwell conducted a séance, a chilling attempt to make contact with the unseen force that had tormented the house for decades. The room grew frigid, and I could see my breath in the air as I watched, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and hope. Mrs. Blackwell's voice quivered as she addressed the entity that loomed in the darkness. "Who are you? What do you want?" she implored, her voice barely above a whisper. In response, the room quivered, and a voice, cold and malevolent, hissed its reply. "I want what was taken from me. I want to live again." I recoiled in terror. The entity's words were like shards of ice, and I couldn't fathom what it meant. Mrs. Blackwell pressed on, seeking to understand and negotiate with the malevolent force, but as she did, it grew more agitated and the room darkened further, as if it sought to engulf us both. Mrs. Blackwell, her voice unwavering, commanded, "Leave this place. You have no power here." With those words, the entity relented, retreating into the shadows. The room returned to its usual state, but the air remained charged with tension. Mrs. Blackwell explained that the house carried a dark history, and the entity was a manifestation of the torment and suffering that had taken place within its walls. It had become attached to Margaret in her later years, seeking to use her as a vessel to return to the world of the living. Terrified and yet determined to free my home from the malevolent presence, I embarked on a quest to uncover the truth about the entity's origins. I found a hidden room in the attic, a dusty chamber filled with old photographs and letters that Margaret had kept locked away. As I sifted through the belongings, I stumbled upon a faded photograph of a young woman, and in an instant, the entity's face became clear, unmistakable. It was the same woman who had been a part of Margaret's family, a distant ancestor named Eliza. Eliza had been a woman of great beauty and charm, but her life had been marred by tragedy. She had been consumed by a darkness, an unrelenting desire for eternal life. In her desperation, she had resorted to a forbidden ritual in the Whispering Woods, a ritual that promised immortality but demanded a terrible price. The ritual had bound her spirit to the house, trapping her in a shadowy existence. She had wandered through the generations, seeking a way to break free from her curse. Margaret had become the last in a long line of victims, and her notes had been pleas for help, warnings of the entity that now sought to claim my life. Armed with this knowledge, I devised a plan to confront Eliza's spirit and release her from the curse that bound her. I gathered the photographs, the letters and Margaret's notes, and ventured into the attic. With a heavy heart, I began to burn the items, whispering words of release and forgiveness. As the flames consumed the photographs and letters, I felt a sudden rush of cold air, and a mournful sigh filled the room. Eliza's spirit appeared before me, her eyes filled with sorrow and longing. I spoke to her, offering forgiveness and understanding, and as the last remnants of the items turned to ash, her spirit dissipated, disappearing into the ether. The house was finally free from the malevolent entity that had plagued it for decades, and I felt a profound sense of peace. The eerie presence that had once haunted me had now faded, leaving behind only a sense of history and the whispers of a past that had been set free. Spooky Harbour had lived up to its name, and I had confronted the darkness that had lurked within my home. The town's history was still shrouded in mystery, but I had played a part in uncovering one of its chilling secrets, and in doing so, I had brought closure to the restless spirit of Eliza.